Boom! Welcome into SportsBIT Betting Insight today. Pauly and Teddy, Monday, February 13th. Big game breakdown. 3 games to go over. Spurs continue the road trip in Indiana to take on the Pacers, and the doubleheader on ESPN. Louisville and Syracuse, West Virginia and Kansas, and the deep dive. I know it sucks. Football's over, but we're less than a month away from Selection Sunday. We'll talk about what the committee did on Saturdays. They released the top 4 seeds if the tournament started Saturday. Top 4 seeds in each region. We'll kick that around and look at the Kenpom numbers as well. And, of course, the play of the day. Bad beats, bad bets, bad for the books. Look at this. Here's a bad bet. Right off the bat, Teddy, the Spurs were bet up to 9.5 in the Garden. They continue this trend where they lose to bad teams.
Yeah, I mean, if you say, what the hell's going on with San Antonio? The rodeo road trip, one of the times that not just 1 year or 2 years, for the better part of the last 2 decades, this has been a time you can bet on the Spurs and make money consistently. Not the case so far this year. 1-3 against the spread to open up that rodeo road trip. 5-4 straight up their last 9. And, of course, 3 of the 4 losses to sub-500 teams. We'll be talking about that more in a minute. Well, in a few minutes. When we break down the game tonight against Indiana. When we look at yesterday's game, really, 3-point shooting came down to it. San Antonio shoots 20.7 from beyond the arc. That's their worst 3-point shooting percentage of the season. The Knicks, 64.3% from beyond the arc. That's their best so far this season. Hence, the 4-point upset. All that money on San Antonio was not on a right side winner.
Yeah, more on this coming up. Tony Parker played 30 minutes and didn't score. He took 3 shots. Come on. Get to that coming up. I'll throw it right back at you, Teddy. So what's wrong with San Antonio? What's wrong with Charlotte and Toronto?
Okay, well, Charlotte loses again. Toronto blows a 16-point lead in the 4th at home Detroit. Let's use them separately. Charlotte's not that good. And Kemba Walker's in a nasty slump. And when Walker's not leading that team to victory, they stink. And right now, I mean, if you've been betting against Charlotte for the last month, you made a whole bunch of money. I'm not convinced that's going to turn around. Toronto, I think there's a couple issues. I think Toronto got a little bit fat and happy before the All-Star break. They had such a hot start to the season where they exceeded everybody's expectations, and they've looked a little bit gassed. They have not, DeRozan was out, and he's been back on the floor, in and out. They haven't found that same magic they had. And, of course, in terms of yesterday's game, I should say, the Pistons were 16 down entering the 4th quarter in that game. That's the largest deficit they've overcome in a regulation game since the team moved to Detroit from Fort Wayne in 1957-58. How about that one from the ESPN stats and info? The Pistons do not have a long track record, a long and storied track record of rallying back from big deficits in the 4th quarter. They did it yesterday, though.
Yeah, amazing. Bad for the books. Well, you got injury news here, or at least guys that were out because of rest, and they bet the T-Wolves from 1 up to 7, 6-point move. The Wolves blew out the Bulls without Butler and Wade. And then this made sense. UCLA off the big comeback win at home against Oregon. In came god-awful Oregon State. Probably the worst team from a Power 6 conference. Them in Missouri. And, they bet Oregon State, and they also bet the under. And they got that right.
Sure. Let's start with the T-Wolves. Where the shops really had to adjust quickly. The Butler-Wade announcement went, and boom, the money started moving, and it didn't stop. And, of course, once an announcement was made, the adjustment, they couldn't make adjustment high enough, obviously. A really bad result for the house in that contest with Minnesota blowing out Chicago. And in college, the bettors got it right with the side. The bettors got it right with the total, betting Oregon State and under. They projected the Bruins to come out flat in front of a flat crowd. Pac-12 TV forced it at 2 p.m. Sunday tip-off. That's not an ideal time. The Bruins fans didn't show up. The team, they played well enough to get the win. But they were never really in position to notch the point spread cover there. Oregon State and under. Bad result for the books.
Yeah, this was a great game. Double overtime on ESPNU. Virginia Tech at home. They took money, bet down from 7 to 5. They beat Virginia in double overtime with a huge win. It's been a long time since I saw Virginia play that bad on defense.
Yeah, and that's the exception rather than the rule. But Virginia, they're human. They're capable. Bennett's teams play phenomenal defense. They play slow. It's almost like St. Mary's on Saturday against Gonzaga, where didn't matter what they did. The Zags were just hitting, Virginia wasn't up to it defensively against Virginia Tech, obviously, losing the game outright in double overtime. What about Northwestern? See the huge win at Wisconsin. Now 8-4 in conference play, a team that hasn't had a winning record in the Big Ten since 19 1968, Pauly. Wildcats might have punched their ticket yesterday with that win in Madison.
I'll agree with that. They've never made the tournament, so it makes sense after the Cavs and the Cubs and Leicester City that Northwestern would finally make the big dance. And who knows, maybe win a game as well. Speaking of Leicester City, how about this? Here's a bad beat. If you continue to bet Leicester City, they haven't scored in their last 6 matches. They're looking at being relegated. ESPN Stats and Info, they're the first reigning top-flight English champ to go 6 straight top division games without scoring. They lose again. They're shut out again. And they're at the bottom, close to the bottom of relegation. They're in the Premier League. How about that? From rags to riches, from riches to rags. It could be for Leicester City. That's unbelievable what's going on there.
Yeah, I don't claim to be an expert, but this much I know. When a team is 5,000 to 1 to win a title, and then they do it, it's going to be real hard for them to do it again the next year. Leicester City came out of nowhere. They didn't get the title last year because they suddenly got a bunch of stars. Just everything broke right for them, and obviously the flip side of that so far this season. What's it, 6 straight games without scoring? That's not a pretty run for the fans or the bettors.
No. You wanted to go off a quick little rant on the mainstream media.
Well, yeah, I had to. I saw a little thing, and this is something we were talking about. Obviously, we featured on the weekend preview edition of SportsBIT, that crazy line move in the Oklahoma City game versus Cleveland, where at one point OKC was a 12-point favorite in that game. But, at one point. Quote, on Thursday night, the Oklahoma City Thunder had what might be their biggest win of the season, taking on the defending NBA champ Cleveland Cavaliers, who've been riding a 4-game win streak. The Thunder pulled out the upset. This is a 12-point favorite. That pulled out the upset. That's mainstream media. That's why you come to SportsBIT.
Also, we talked about this last week's show. The mainstream media is all over Isaiah Thomas to get MVP consideration. I don't know if they have access to those numbers, but they should. That he's the worst point guard in terms of defense in the entire league, which he can score.
Well, the crazy thing, the thing that cracks me up about the Isaiah Thomas stats is the real plus-minus, where it shows that the Celtics are a better team with him on the bench than they are with him on the floor. And I know I don't believe that. In over 48 minutes, I'm not convinced that's true. But Isaiah Thomas getting MVP consideration when the team's better with him on the bench might be some of the mainstream guys want to look at some advanced metric stats. That's something we try to do each and every show here on SportsBIT.
All right, up next, big game breakdown, the big doubleheader on ESPN. We'll start with the Spurs and the Pacers on SportsBIT. Betting Insight today on SPRPicks.com.
Do your research before you bet. Check out our ratings guide to see which books have the best ratings and sign-up bonuses. Open up several accounts and shop for lines at SPRodds.com. Always be ahead of the game.
Back on SportsBIT, Betting Insight today. Follow us on Twitter at Pauly Howard at Teddy_covers. Time for a big game breakdown. As always, live odds, sportsbookreview.com. Starting the association, Spurs continue the road trip against the Pacers. Spurs are 2.5, 207 in some spots. The markets don't know what to do. Back-to-back, they expect, well, look what's gone on the last couple weeks in the association. Pop could sit people in this one, Teddy.
Yeah, and again, there's maybe 2 or 3 books that have lines posted as we speak. I would expect the broader markets will price San Antonio as a favorite with a total in this range once we get whatever announcements we're going to get this morning. But the bottom line right now for San Antonio, the market's very nervous with the Spurs on the second of back-to-backs. They're expecting or anticipating the potential for Pop to be sitting guys.
And this continues against bad teams. Look at this up here. Look at the last month. They were laying 10 to Milwaukee at home, got beat. They were 12 against Dallas and lost. They were 9.5 against the Knicks and got beat. And they led the Knicks by 12. Then the offense went dead. And it was the Kawhi Leonard show. Nobody helped them out. Parker didn't do anything. Green couldn't hit a shot. It was crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're supposed to remember the time that we used to trust the Spurs to play smart enough to outclass the bad teams. That hasn't been there of late. As you mentioned, 4 outright losses over the last month against sub-500 squads. Teams that are at least 7 games under 500. And, of course, you talk about Kawhi Leonard yesterday. Kawhi was great, 36 points in 35 minutes. But they didn't get anything from their starting backcourt. Look, Danny Green, 33 minutes. He was 2 of 13, finished with 6 points. Tony Parker, as you mentioned, a non-factor on the offensive end. 31 minutes, just 0 for 3 from the floor, finished the game scoreless. And that's even worse when you look at those backcourt numbers. When you consider the fact that one of them was being guarded by Derrick Rose for most of those stretches. Rose not exactly playing elite level defense these days. The Spurs, other than Kawhi Leonard, 20 of 64, shooting in the 30% range yesterday. Pops, I thought we were a little quick on the shots and a little contested. They got into us good. They were a little physical. I just don't think we played wisely in that regard. I never view it as a good thing when a coach is talking about the Knicks as being physical against their team. New York not known for their physical style of play.
Parker did have 12 assists Friday night in Detroit, but the last two games only 2 points in 62 minutes and only 7 shots. He can't get to the basket.
No, I mean, we're seeing Tony Parker as a point guard who has lost a step. And Parker, who was always as quick as anybody in the NBA at getting the hoop, no, he can't get around guys now, as you see very clearly from this picture.
Pacers had put together a strong run after their London trip by picking it up on defense, and that went all away when they were home against the Cavs. Cavs did whatever they wanted, and then they were having problems against Milwaukee. Milwaukee had 28 assists versus only 6 turnovers in the 116-100 win. 17 of 31 from 3, Teddy.
Yeah, I mean, when you're allowing a 26-8 assist-to-turnover ratio against Milwaukee, and the Bucks, after losing Jabari Parker and after talking about how the team was lifeless, so all of a sudden go 17 of 31 from beyond the arc, that's something of a problem. They had held 4 straight teams to 97 or less. They stretched out their win streak to 7. And then the last 3, a $132, a $112, a $116. And Nate McMillan, following the Bucks loss, quote, I thought we just didn't have a motor for whatever reason. They pretty much did whatever they wanted. But we talk about this Pacers team, Pauly. They might have the most important week of any in the NBA leading up to the All-Star break. They have the Spurs tonight, then they have back-to-backs against the Cavs and the Wiz on Wednesday and Thursday, 2 teams that just beat them last week. Thaddeus Young, a question mark this evening. He's missed the last 5 games for Indy.
Let's go to college now. The doubleheader on ESPN tonight. The first game, 4 o'clock Pacific. Louisville takes on Syracuse on the road. Louisville 4, 141 the total. Syracuse on the bubble, so they can hopefully they can punch their ticket with a big win here. They had a 5-0 straight up an ATS run that came to an end with the bad loss against Pitt, Teddy. Was fatigue an issue in that game?
It's going to be an issue for Syracuse. I mean, in each of the previous 3 wins, Syracuse trailed by 9 or more in the second half and rallied to steal those victories. They trailed by 7 in the second half on Saturday, and they just didn't have anything in the tank. Nothing in the tank. And you look at the workload for Tyler Lydon, Andrew White, John Gillen. All right? It's insane. I mean, White left the court for 2 minutes in a 18-point loss at Notre Dame on January 21st. Lydon left the court for the final minute in a 19-point loss at North Carolina on January 16th. And then there's Tyus Battle. He's played at least 33 minutes in each of the last 9 games. He only played 16 on Saturday, but that's because he was sick. He's not 100%. I know the quick turnaround helps him. And, of course, with all of these guys playing all of these minutes, they only have 1 day off to prepare for those Louisville presses. This is not a great spot for a Syracuse team that's being priced like all the bubble teams are going to be priced from here on out, Pauly. Must win for Syracuse. And you see the numbers consistently either higher or lower than they should be because of that must-win status.
You cannot handicap human emotion. I know Boeheim was emotional because the news broke after the game Saturday. Fab Melo passed away at 26 years old over the weekend. There's got to be some, I'm sure, an emotional tribute before the game. What do you think? What do you make of that?
In terms of what it means to the Syracuse community, I'm sure it's devastating.
To the team, no doubt, the community, yes. I don't know how it affects this particular team, though.
Players on the floor, I don't think it affects them one bit. It's not like Fab Melo was in practice every day. It's not like these kids know necessarily who he was for the Syracuse program. The Orange fans know who he was. But in terms of for tonight's game, I can't imagine having nothing that I can discern say the point spread should be adjusted because of that tragedy.
No, I'm with you on that one. Now, Louisville had the win at home Saturday against Miami. They get Quentin Snyder back, and then they were down 10 in that game, Teddy, before coming back.
Yeah, they trailed early. It took them a little while to get going. And maybe freshness was key. We talk about Syracuse not being fresh. Snyder was fresh. I mean, they were still down. They were down with 7.5 left by 3 and had a big closeout against the Hurricanes. And remember, so you have Snyder playing for the first time since January 14th. You have Deng Adel and Mangkok Mathang suspended, didn't play at Virginia last Monday, so they got a full, rare week off inside of conference play. And they didn't start versus Miami. That may have been part of the reason for that early deficit. They still took control in the second half with all those guys on the floor and with relatively fresh legs. Rick Pitino, quote, 90 to 95% of teams lose this game. They don't win this game. They totally outplayed us. They were the better basketball team tonight, but we showed incredible character to win this game. And I am real proud of this team. And you wonder now if that Snyder injury ends up being a bonus for this team down the stretch. Hurt them, obviously, when he was out. But now, we're talking about an elite point guard with fresh legs down the stretch.
All right, the second game, 6 o'clock Pacific, also on ESPN. The rematch, West Virginia, Kansas. Kansas 4.5, 158.5 the total. They met January 24th in Morgantown. Kansas came into that game ranked number 2. It was 85-69. Mountaineers won, and they won the boards. They shot almost 50% from the field, but Kansas led by 1 with 10 minutes left. Then a 27-10 run for West Virginia, Teddy.
Yeah, and usually when the Mountaineers pull off a big win at home against a good team, the knee-jerk reaction, you're always like, give credit to the pressing defense, all about the defense. Nuh-uh. When West Virginia blew out Kansas down the stretch of that first meeting, it was rebounding, 38-28, plus 10 on the glass, and offense, 22 assists versus only 8 turnovers. Issa Ahmad scored 27, as you mentioned, West Virginia just shy of 50% from the floor. Now, Kansas did lead with 10 minutes left before that West Virginia closeout, but we saw the good and the bad of the Kansas offense in that game. It really was. Frank Mason, Devontae Graham, they have about as much experience versus those West Virginia presses as any guard combo in the country. But Kansas, 16 assists versus 13 turnovers, reasonable ratio, 13-29 triples, good ratio, and yet they still lost that game by 16. That's concerning. And it was the same story last year. West Virginia won by 11 at home. Kansas won by 10 in the rematch, and then again by 10 in the conference tournament.
Yep, maybe fatigue an issue here too. West Virginia had 11 players go at least 8 minutes on Saturday. Their starters only played 118 of 200 minutes. Huggins on the short turnaround. I'd like to go short, practice hard, but then you can't cover everything you need to cover. We'll try to get them watching more film. Kansas starters played 163 of 200 at Texas Tech. Mason fouled out in that one. Only 7 players saw action. What do you think of what both teams are looking at in that as far as fatigue, Teddy?
Well, I'm concerned about the Kansas side of the equation. This is something we always like to look at come February. West Virginia with that 11-man rotation, or 10 or 11, depending on the game. Starters only played, as you mentioned, 118 minutes on Saturday. For Kansas, you look at their last 5 games. All 5 of them, tough grinders. They went down to the final possession versus quality competition at Texas Tech, Kansas State, Kentucky, home versus Iowa State, and Baylor. I mean, every one of those games, tight grinder. I worry about fatigue, especially when you start to look at some of the minutes, because you look at the last 5 games at a possible 205 minutes. Frank Mason played a bunch. Devontae Graham played a bunch. Josh Jackson played a bunch. Bill, it's a situation where Bill Self is going to be up against it a little bit when it comes to his rotation down the stretch. That worries me about the Jayhawks tonight in this quote-unquote revenge situation where they not only have to win, they got to win by margin.
Up next, we'll get to what the committee did on Saturday. A lot of people up in arms with what happened to Gonzaga. We'll get to all that coming up and the play of the day on SportsBIT. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Go to SBROdds.com. Browse, compare, and shop live odds available at top online sportsbooks.
Wrapping it up on SportsBIT, Betting Insight today, Pauly and Teddy. Time for the deep dive. Saturday on CBS, I don't know how many people knew about this, but college basketball, you're not college football. For the most part, fans don't tune in till March. It is a 2 or 3 week sport. That's the unfortunate reality as the casual fans come in, and certainly nothing better than the first 4 days. But February, it's like football's over. You got to you wait till the madness begins. But they came out with the top 4 seeds in all 4 regions if the tournament started Saturday. The big surprise to me was Gonzaga they were the last number 1 seed, and they also were on national television later that night. They went out and destroyed St. Mary's again. They are now 26-0 with a 90% chance to run the table. 3 of their final 4 games are at home, so an excellent chance they would be 33-0 going into the actual tournament. Seth Greenberg made a good point that all these teams are going to lose around them. So they still should be able to get a number one, no problem. But I was still surprised with a win over Arizona, Tennessee, and Florida that the last one seed, Teddy, even though undefeated.
They're never going to make it easy for teams like Gonzaga. They never have. And the reason they don't is because the NCAA makes more money from the Kentuckys and the North Carolinas and the Indianas of the world than they do from the Gonzagas of the world. And it's just that simple. So never forget that this amateur athletic organization, the NCAA, is designed to make money. And when you make money, that means the mid-majors get shafted. And they do every year, and Gonzaga's getting shafted here. I'm with you. Again, I don't care what the committee says. The committee is a bunch of idiots. Pardon my language. I guess that's not really an inappropriate way of saying it. But I should have said it a lot more inappropriately than that. When you want to know who's good in college basketball, you look at the advanced metric numbers. And you have two sets to choose from. And they're both very, in terms of the listings of the teams, they're very comparable. You can go to Kenpom at kenpom.com. You can go to Jeff Sager and you can find his stuff at USA Today or somewhere. If you Google him, you can find it without a problem. Those numbers will tell you who's good and who isn't based on all the advanced metrics. And what do they say? Clearly, both polls, Gonzaga the number one team in the country. So, and watching them beat St. Mary's on Saturday night, that was pretty impressive, Pauly. They looked really good.
Yep, other surprises, Butler of 4. They have a great resume. Remember, they beat Arizona in the non-conference earlier in the season. That surprised me. I thought they'd be a little higher. Of course, then they went out Saturday and got beat. And also UCLA, a 4 seed, which that is a talented team. And I would want to play them in the second round. Holy cow.
Yeah, but again, when you look at the advanced metric numbers, Butler's not in the top 20. So you say you thought they should be higher. In my opinion, I think they should be lower, and especially after losing on Saturday. And of course, these numbers are up to date following the end of yesterday's game. But games, when you look at the Pac-12, and again, all I care about is the advanced metric numbers. When you look at the Pac-12 and the advanced metric numbers, I kind of think they're getting they're getting shafted a little bit. You know, we talk about UCLA as a 4. Where's Oregon on this list?
They were a 2, I believe.
Right. When it comes to the Pomeroy ratings, Oregon's sitting outside the top 15 right now, which stands out to me as someone that's maybe being a little bit undervalued. But the biggest story of all, of course, is the Big Ten, Pauly.
How about that? Shut out. A lot of people couldn't believe that.
I would think Wisconsin lost yesterday at home to Northwestern. You make a case, but even with the loss, Wisconsin's still the 15 team in the country. According to the Palm numbers, Purdue's a team that has to be there. And Maryland's another team that I think has to be there. I'm a little bit surprised by the committee's lack of respect for all those squads, but Purdue in particular. Why aren't the Boilermakers getting love? Is it a straight-up loss kind of a thing?
I don't know. I can't tell you what these guys do. I mean, after what they did last year to the little guy. Let me ask you this. So you're saying lack of respect for the Big Ten, and certainly you're right. I think we're overdoing it with the ACC. I mean, 10, 11 teams coming from one conference? Come on now.
Well, when you look at the top, when you look at the top 16 teams, and the ACC gets 5 of them, 3 for the Pac-12, 3 from the Big 12, 2 from the Big East, 2 from the SEC, and then of course you have Gonzaga coming from the West Coast Conference. Again, you're always going to get the ACC love. Why? The ACC's got the biggest coaches. The ACC's got the biggest names. The ACC is on TV more than any of the other conferences. Therefore, you're going to get the level of respect for the ACC that you don't get. But, in my mind, you don't want to penalize a team because they play in a tough conference. Say, all right, well, we already let 9 other teams from the ACC in. Therefore, you can't let the 10th in. I'm not buying that. But what I want to know is where's the mid-major love, man?
Nothing. Yeah. It's another
where's
horrible
Wichita
year.
State? Okay,
let me jump in. Last year was total bullshit. What they did last year was a disgrace. They didn't let any of these little guys get in. The Monmouth snub, there were plenty of snubs there where they didn't put the little guy in. But you look at, there's not much there, Teddy. When we do the Google Hangout, we talked about NC Wilmington. They've lost 3 times now. Belmont got beat over the weekend. Akron had a loss. Middle Tennessee got beat, I think, a week ago. So there is nothing. You look. And Joe Lenardi, who's the so-called expert that does this for ESPN, when you see the last teams that are in, last 4 buys, first 4 that just missed, and the last 4 out, there's one mid-major. 15 are from power conferences. It might be the worst year ever for the little guy. And part of the why we like the first 4 days, the big upsets. Can you get a Gulf Coast, a Princeton, etc.? But I mean, they're going to get in with the automatic bid. But as far as at-large bids, you're right, not going to happen.
So let me ask you this, Pauly. You know, we're looking at the teams. We obviously have a disparity in how the teams are graded and how they're ranked. But my biggest question, any way to make money off of this? Especially when we're looking at the disparity between where the teams are ranked versus where they are in terms of the advanced metric numbers?
I know it worked a couple of years ago in college football. If you took the biggest gap between the polls and the power rankings and bet on the power rankings, you made money. So that's something we should look forward to the next couple of weeks. I think you're onto something there. It did work in college football a while back. And I think when you look, throw out the computers and what they do with the committee now. But I think if there's a sizable gap there, for example, like a Butler, I think he can take advantage of it.
A team that you might be able to make some money betting against as opposed to betting on.
Yes. All right, money time. Play of the day. Back to Louisville, Syracuse. What are we doing?
Let's take a look at game number. I lost my number here. Excuse me. Yes, thank you. 527. The Louisville Cardinals minus the 4 at Syracuse. Syracuse being priced in must-win territory. Just because they're must-win doesn't mean they will win. Louisville with a significant freshness edge. That matters in a matchup like this one. Take Louisville minus the 4. That's our play of the day.
All right, very good. Look for BMOC later in the week. Look for Ian Cameron next week. We're getting the All-Star break coming up, the All-Star weekend this weekend. And they're getting close to the madness, as we talked about earlier. There'll always be NFL news. How about tomorrow? MLB win totals. Not just the Cubs, but the Atlantis put up openers for the MLB win totals. We'll kick that around as well. Fun week coming up on SportsBIT. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.